Okay, so I've got my Unreal launcher open, full screen. Just to make sure we're going to be on the same page here. The new Cinematic Cameras and Cinematic Sequencer were introduced in Unreal Engine 4.12 and above. Well, at 4.12, and they exist from 4.12 and above. So right now, currently, we are at 0.4. So the first thing we want to do is make sure and launch some kind of version of 1.2, and then create a new project. Make sure that it has the starter content. You have a place for it. You want to give it a name. Now, I'm going to delete this tab. I will cover that later. And again, this one, I'll delete that. You should have something that looks like this by default. Okay? So, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's just make sure that we have the correct interface. Okay? Make sure you have the default interface, which is basically modes up here, content browser down here on the left. On the right bottom, you have details, and above that, you have world outliner. Okay, so probably the first question you want to ask or get answered is, what am I looking at? Well, this is just the starter scene, which is with some sample objects you can move around. Okay, and all of the items that you put in a scene here can be moved around. You can use the Maya keyboard shortcuts of W for move, E for rotate, and R for scale. Okay, and going back to move, there's another important place that you will visit often, and that's this little world icon here. If you toggle it back and forth, it will toggle between world translation and local translation. So in this case, you see the chair is rotated, so I'm moving it in the direction that it's rotated. If I change it back to world, of course, I'm moving it in the world directions of X, Y, and Z. Okay? So that's important for moving the camera. The first thing you want to do is know where are the cameras, and they are here in Cinematic. The Cinematic camera is here, and you can drag this into your viewport here like that. And now it becomes something you can move around, and it will also give you this little viewport here of the camera itself, so you can see the result of moving the camera. Alright, and then another quick item is that the keyboard shortcut for removing these its from the scene is actually G. It's just hiding everything so that you don't see those in your camera viewport. It's apparently not showing in this little guy here, but it will show in the viewports, and we'll get to that later. The other thing you're going to want to know where it is, just off the bat, is you're going to want to know where is the sequencer. Well, the sequencer is right up here in Cinematics, and if you click on this, you want to add a level sequence. And it will ask you for a name for it, and you can type in a name, and we'll just call this shots. Alright, so everything you add in the scene, can be moved around, even though this is nothing that you render or do anything with in the scene. It's there. It's an item in the scene. And it is actually this sequencer here, which by default for you would be putting it up here in the middle like that. It would be floating by default. And because I've been using Unreal for a while and doing this, I myself took this sequencer and scooted it down into here by dragging on the tab. Okay, so picking up where we left off, actually I'm going to delete this camera by hitting the delete key. And this guy, I'm going to just hide it. There is an important key you might want to learn how to use, and that's how to focus on one of these items in the scene. That's Shift F. That will help you navigate the scene a lot better, and it will rotate around the item you last clicked left shift on. So left click F on the, shift click F on the table, and I'm rotating around the table. And that's helpful when you get a camera in there. or anytime you want to just simply focus on anything that you might want to point at with the camera and you want to check it out. Okay, so the reason I deleted the camera is because you might be familiar with Unreal, and if you are, you might have a habit of right-clicking and where you can go down to Place Actor. And if you look on this list, you'll see Camera Actor. Alright, and if you go up here, you'll see Recently Placed Cine Camera Actor. But if you had not recently placed one, you might be thinking, oh, well, Place Actor, Camera Actor, there you go, hey, I got my camera. But it won't be the new Cine camera that they added. You know, to keep backward compatibility, I am sure they have kept it in there. Alright? So, be warned that this is not the new cinematic camera. The new cinematic camera is found here, or, since I added one already, I can simply right-click, Place Actor, and choose Cine Camera. Another way to do it. Now, just to be clear, this is the old one. What color is it? Blue. What's a better color than blue? Black. Because after all, this is the new Cine camera, so it must be better. See, the developers were thinking when they made the color of the camera. Blue? It's okay. Black? Better. So now that we know where we're at, what we're starting with, let's move ahead here. Picking up where we left off, we had our black camera, new Cine camera, and we can move it around. So let's just set this one up and get it into some kind of position to get a shot of our scene. And we'll start it off like so, and like so, and get it set to there. That's fine. That's good enough. Maybe a little bit higher, and then we'll rotate it down like that. Just a basic shot behind everything. Now, I'm going to right-click on the camera, go to Edit, Rename, and I'm going to call it Shot 1. Okay? So, there's our basic setup for that one. Now, the reason I named it Shot 1 is because we can duplicate it, and when we do, it will automatically rename it for us. So I'll show you that in a sec, but I'm going to switch back to global here, and so we now see the world, and now it's moving on the global axis. And I will simply hold the Alt key and slide it forward. And it's got the same properties as the other one, and it automatically named it as Shot 2, which is convenient. I kind of like that, so that's easy. So let's just rotate this guy around, and let's get the opposite view of the scene. So that'll be the basic setup for these two cameras. One is looking from one direction. Let's make this one a little bit higher. It's looking from the other direction and a little higher. Alright, so now I want to add another camera, and I'll do that by holding Alt, drag, and move this around. And I'm going to get this angle, and I'm going to actually switch over now to local, and I'm going to push it down in on the table, pull it up a little bit, and let's just focus on this little sculpture piece or whatever it is on the table, like so. Alright, so now we have Shot 1, and you'll notice that it changes down here to that camera. Shot 2, Shot 3, and so we have our 3 cameras in the scene that we want to use. Alright, so that's the basic starting point. Now, there are some settings for the cameras. We'll get into that later, but right now I just want to continue with just the basic setup. We're not doing anything fancy yet. We're just getting the basic setup. So let's continue with that. What we want to do now is we have the sequencer over here, and we just simply want to select all 3 of the cameras by shift selecting. Right, and now you'll get 3 viewports down here, and I'll just simply add, and then go up here to the top, add current selection, 3 actors, and then bam, we've got our 3 cameras already lined up there on the sequencer. And so the sequencer, I'll go over the controls later, but again, we're just going to do the basic setup here. There's only one more thing we need for the basic setup, and that's to add a camera cut track. And then to that cut track, we want to add at least one camera to start with. And we'll go with shot 1, and you'll see it right there. That shot 1 camera's viewport is here. Okay, so now with this setup, we'll continue in the next lesson. So here we are. We have our 3 cameras, and you'll notice that when you select a camera, it actually selects it in the sequencer and the other way around too. You can select it in the sequencer and as well select it in the viewport. All right, and that's important to know. By default, it expands these channels that you will be editing and adding keyframes to later. For now, we're not going to get into that. We're just going to close these down so that we can see everything clearly by moving this down to here like that. That way I've got all 3 tracks clearly visible, and I've got my viewport visible, because the next basic setup that I want to do is I want to get another viewport setup in here. So let's do that. Go to Window, Viewports. We have one already. Let's add one more, viewport 2. That'll pop it right there. Again, for you, more than likely, it will pop it in the middle, like that. But because I've done this already once, the Unreal Engine editor seems to remember my last choice, and it puts it there, like it did with the sequencer. It remembered that I wanted it there, and it put it there. So in this case, I'm just going to slide it over, like what you will have to do is slide it over to this side, and when you see it take its shape right there and let go, and now you have your 2 viewports. The reason I want this is because I want this viewport to show the camera and this viewport to navigate around my scene, press Shift F on, and get around a camera and make adjustments to it. Okay, but I want to see the result of that over here. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to click on this where it says perspective, move down to here, and I believe this is shot 3, yes? So I want to see the result of shot 3. So if I move the camera here, I've got shot 3 over there. Again, another basic thing that you want to know when you're setting up shots and animating cameras and so on is you want one viewport showing the camera, and you want one viewport to edit the camera in. Alternatively, you can also use navigating tools in this viewport to move the camera, if you so choose. If you like doing it that way and you want to just move things around. I'm basically using my left mouse drag and pushing forward. Right mouse is rotating it left and right and up and down. And I believe middle mouse will kind of, track it or crane it, if you will, up and down, right? You can see I'm moving it across the scene this way, like in world space. Whereas if I scroll wheel, I'm actually going right there in local space or object space, similar to how we have these choices up here. Okay, so that's just 2 different ways to navigate the camera. You could also make this camera, if you like doing it that way, you could have this take up a full screen. What I like to do, however, is I like to have this screen here moved to another screen off that you can't see because I use 2 monitors. Some people use 3. In my case, I'm using 2. But for this tutorial, I'm going to leave it right there just to illustrate. Okay, so that's the other basic setup, is that we've got our cameras and we've got a way to look at them, and then now we're going to do one more thing, and that is we're going to add the rest of the cameras to this timeline here. So if we move this red slider, this is moving us through time, and before I do anything else, I want to set my frame rate to 24 frames per second. Then I'm simply just going to slide to another frame. I'm going to go to camera, choose shot 2, and bam, it puts it in there. I'm going to slide a little bit further, and I'm going to choose camera and shot 3. Okay, so now we have shot 1, shot 2, and shot 3, as you can see in the clip here. Alright, so now this clip is basically, it's like a nonlinear editor. So this will, this is something we can move. Each one of these is a separate clip, and we can move it, right? And by default, I guess it's set to ripple edit. I'm not sure if you can change that. Maybe you can. So I'm going to move this over there. The other one will follow, and then I can move this one back here. So I can adjust the length of these clips, right? So now, before we get anything more fancy, you're going to want to know, now, how can I see all these cameras play and view the different shots? And of course, you'll be disappointed as soon as you press play, because you'll be wondering, why don't I see anything happening? And there's a reason for that. And first of all, if you'll remember, we have these previews of these cameras, right? So you would actually have to have 3, viewports in order to see them, or like any other editing setup, you'd have one viewport that shows a switch. I mean, but it's not set up that way. So to show the switches between the cameras, you have to actually manually say that's what I want. And the way to do that is you simply click on this white camera icon here, and it says lock viewport to camera cuts. Self-explanatory. Click on that. We can now see the result of these camera cuts. Okay, and we're done. All right. So again, that's just a very basic setup. You've got your 3 cameras, you've got your cuts, and so on. One more thing that you want to change before we end this segment is you don't want to see this camera in there, and you don't want to see any of the other icons of stuff that's not a part of your scene when you're looking at the camera viewport. You want to see the camera. You don't want to see other stuff in there. So the solution to that is to click on this screen. You actually have to click on it so that it highlights in yellow, and hit the G key. You do that, your cameras go away, and now you can play and just see it as you would see it in the final render. Okay? And so that's what we'll cover next. We'll cover how do we render these cuts into frames. Again, just going over the basics first, then we'll come back to more advanced features. Okay, so now that we have our basic setup, we can see the camera shots cycling through there in our viewports up there. The next thing we want to know is, how do we make a movie out of this? Well, the icon that looks like a clapper is our friend. So we click on that guy, and it brings up our render movie settings. And so what we want to do is, if you look here, there's if you expand these, there's various different settings, most of which we won't deal with. What we have up here is image sequence. We can use video sequence, and we can use image sequence PNG, image sequence JPEG, and image sequence BMP. Then you can set your aspect ratio of your frame, and in this case I'm going with HD. You can also use 4K. And then I have a path set up already, so I can click here and set my path for where I want it to go. And then I can set this. By default, it actually gives you naming brackets here. So what I did was I deleted the bracket on the left, which just automatically would have named it the same as my project. And on the right, it will automatically give it frame names at the end. So I'm just leaving it as toot and then frame. Okay, and so that's really all you need to do. There's other options, but right here you'll see it will be telling you the beginning frame and end frame. We'll go over that later, but for now we just click Capture Video. All right, so that's that. Let's close this, and then what you would then do is navigate to where those frames would be. And you got all the frames from the beginning to the end. Okay, so there you go. That finishes this part of it. So we've got from all the way from the beginning all the way to making a movie using the new cinematic tools.